Thank you. All right. Excited to start this panel. Thank you, everybody. I was told by very many people that there are a couple of panels that they're really looking forward to, and this was one of them. I'm very happy to be moderating this panel with an international group of folks who are leading various safety institutes. So, of course, the big topic of the week is AI safety, and all of the individuals on our panels represent the government organizations that have been spun up in the last few years to specifically address the issues of AI safety and responsibility. So we can maybe go down the row, introduce yourself, what country you're from, and the AC you represent. Yeah, start with Claire at the end.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Very impressed, remember, by your teacher-like kind of opening. I used to, in a previous life, I was a teacher, so I really respect being able to get the attention of a room. So I'm, hi everyone, I'm Clara Pelly. I'm the Deputy Director for the International Team at the UK AI Safety Institute. So we were launched, Nico gave us a good kind of tee up by mentioning Bletchley in 2023. We were launched just after that. I actually joined the team the week that the AI Safety Institute was born. So that's a nice kind of coincidence about a year and 3 months ago. And yes, we've grown kind of very rapidly since then. So I think at that point we had around kind of 10 or so technical researchers, and we now have over 60 technical researchers, which I think is one of the biggest kind of concentrations of AI safety talent in the world in any government. So that's one of the reasons why we were set up. So we're kind of super excited that we have that capability in government, and very excited to be here. So thank you very much.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Samir Chabra. I'm the General for Marketplace Framework Policy within the Innovation, Science and Economic Development Department, Government of Canada. Our institute, Canadian AI Safety Institute, was established just in November, so we're just a few months old. Ours is set up a little bit differently, perhaps, than some of the other ones around the world are. I think in respect of the strength of the Canadian AI research ecosystem and the community, and attempting to leverage that. So our AI Safety Institute was established with a $50 million budget over 5 years. $27 million of that will go to the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research to work through the AI institutes in Canada, which many of you would know, Mila, Emmy, and Vector. And so that'll be enabling academics and community organizations and experts that are already in the AI space to launch projects in relation to AI safety and following kind of government priorities. We also have, in fact, in the audience today, representatives from our National Research Council, which is a government agency, which is also a partner with us in establishing this work that will take on government-directed projects, those that are perhaps a little bit more sensitive or have national security dimensions, those with interesting intellectual property considerations, or those that just need to be managed in a more agile, kind of close to government fashion. That'll be the National Research Council. And then my team's responsible in my space from, kind of competition law to intellectual property to privacy. On the AI side specifically, we'll have both an AI policy team, which is really more on the responsible AI regulatory considerations, and then a separate focus on the AI safety team, where we will work with our partners internationally, and we'll help coordinate the work between the National Research Council and the CFAR work. So that's kind of how we're set up quickly. I'll draw you guys a diagram if you want, because it's hard to follow it all. But we're quite happy with the way it's spun up in just the last few months, and hoping that you'll see dividends from that and that approach to really build AI safety in an inclusive way, to have a number of different voices at the table, a number of different perspectives and priorities brought to bear on it, I think is an important way about going about this.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wan Si, Lee Wan Si from Singapore. Just want to check any Singapore people in the room. Okay, like people from my team and you. Okay, anyway, hi, everyone. I sort of represent the Singapore AC. I think like a few months ago, just before we had the November convening, I was speaking on a panel, and then I was saying, actually, all the ACs are kind of different, right? You need to remember that we are all not as well resourced as the UK AC. And we all are set up slightly differently. The Singapore one is also quite different. Actually, we've always had a sort of a AI safety focus in the work that we do. A couple of years ago, we invested 50 million Singapore dollars, which is about I don't know, 30 million USD thereabouts, in a center that we call the Digital Trust Center. And that's a national institution for building trust. And AI safety is one of the key components of the work that the Digital Trust Center does. So when ACs became in vogue after Bletchley, we decided that it's also important to put a little bit of emphasis on the work that we've already done in AI safety. And hence we tag a label of Singapore AI Safety Institute to the Digital Trust Center. So it's an existing institute that we sort of added sort of brand to it called Singapore AC. At the same time, after a while, we realized that actually it's not just about the research work. So Digital Trust Center was cited in the Nanyang Technological University, focusing very much on research, advancing eval science, for example. But we decided it's not just about research. We need to do testing. We need to actually look at some of the policy areas that we want to drive. We need to work internationally within the AAC network. And then that's where I come in, right? So I head up the policy work in SGAC. I'm actually part of Infocom Media Development Authority. So we decided to bootstrap our AC with some of the more government capabilities. We're all civil servants here, yeah. Hence the jacket and the shirt. And, yeah, we look a little bit different from the previous panel, yeah. But yeah, but it was important for us that we add that policy dimension as well to make sure that the work that the AC does actually addresses some of our national concerns around risk, right? National priorities around developing eval capabilities. So yeah, so that's in short what Singapore AC does. I can talk on and on about it, but I think we have just a little bit of time. So happy to take questions later if you're interested. Yeah, and I could also draw you guys a diagram if you like. Yeah, we have some standard slides for this. Yeah.
Yes, and for everybody who's here, I know there's a bunch of burning questions in the audience. For this group in particular, I was pulled aside by 3 or 4 people saying, will you have Q&A with the safety? We will at the very end. But I did want to start with you, Clara. You know, you said that you would start in the very beginning of the very beginning. You know, all of us kind of convened in Bletchley in the very damp tents many moons ago. And it's been, you know, while it has not been seemingly a lot of time chronologically, AI time runs differently and things have changed. What would you say are the biggest changes you've seen from, you know, the original November Bletchley to this summit in Paris?
Great question. So I guess 2 things really, and actually touching on a bit, drawing on a bit some of the themes from the previous panel just now, and actually a bit from what 1C has just been saying. I think one massive change is the kind of building, as you say, Ramon. It's a field that's moving incredibly quickly, and one of the massive kind of jumps forward that we've made is the launch of the International Scientific Report on AI Safety. We have some of the report team from my team in the audience today, I think, who are very tired but very happy having launched the first version of the report just last week. Some people may have seen Joshua Bengio, who's been around and about over the last couple of days. But it's a kind of a real milestone. I think it's a groundbreaking report to bring together for the first time kind of experts, global experts, to synthesize the kind of state of the science. That's something that we didn't have pre-Bletchley, and it's a real achievement, I think, to have got to that point where we've got a product. Sadly, I don't think we have any physical copies just yet because they were held up in the customs, ironically. But to have a physical report that brings together a synthesis of the science, you know, and a shared understanding of the kind of capabilities and risks is a major milestone. And then I think the second thing is, as we were just talking about, the kind of the nascent building the international muscle for how we begin to both understand and tackle the potential emerging risks. So obviously, the 1C, Samir and I were all in San Francisco in November last year for the launch of the International Network of AI Safety Institutes. And it's great that we're all here again just a few months after that, having made some concrete progress. So we're beginning to really, I think, again, Nico was saying this, but really kind of start to put into practice what international cooperation and coordination looks like. So 1C and our teams have collaborated on a joint testing exercise along with the rest of the members of the network, which actually starts to bring together the technical experts to align on kind of the concrete approaches we're taking to understand and measure the risks and kind of begin to align on the approaches, which I think is a real kind of concrete step forward.
Great, thank you. And also want to add that Humane Intelligence's own Theodoros Gaddis was actually one of the people who was contributing to the scientific report. I know there's actually been a lot of visibility around that report. It's kind of driven a lot of the conversation. So Samir, I actually want to go to you as the youngest AC. What's your vision for what comes next, right? So we've moved from understanding capabilities, understanding safety, now talking about science. So from your perspective, for both Canada as well as this international coalition, what comes next?
That's a great question. Thanks, Rowan. From the Canadian perspective, we look at CASI as an organization that is a knowledge developer and a knowledge disseminator. We don't look at the AI Safety Institute network necessarily as playing a regulatory function, but certainly one that connects to the regulatory environment and informs it, informs the standard setting environment. In our instance, and I think some of the other ACs are like this as well, really important to have an appropriate interface with national security institutions and research and activities and projects that are undertaken there. So, definition of success from a CASI perspective, Canadian AI Safety Institute, we shorthanded as CASI, is, are we contributing to advancing international understanding? Are we getting better and stronger results? Are we developing the metrology, as the previous panel was talking about, so that we're actually level setting and creating advancements in how we're thinking about this and actually keeping up with the work as it's moving forward? Are we connecting effectively both internationally as well as domestically with national security considerations and issues? Those are the kind of the watchwords. Are we developing our capacity internally as a country to continue to advance the work so we're getting the right people engaged? That's kind of how we're thinking about it right now. Specific projects will come. We've got a number of them underway. I think 14 initial projects kicked off with Sevgi team at the National Research Council. Our Canadian Institute for Advanced Research just launched calls for proposals, which are open now and generating kind of interest and results. And of course, what we haven't talked about yet is that the international network of ACs has already started collaborating on 3 tracks of work, starting in San Francisco, or actually in the lead up to San Francisco. Canada and Australia have been co-chairing a track of work around synthetic content, which is going to result in the publication very shortly of a research agenda, which is one that I think is a really interesting opportunity to help coordinate the work of the AC network. But I think the really interesting question is going to be, can we expand that and start drawing in projects from other organizations and civil society type organizations like Humane, and actually add those in and say, okay, well, where else are great pieces of work happening? How do we catalog and develop all of those so we're all staying coordinated? I'll let my other colleagues talk about tracks 2 and 3.
So then, Wansi, next question for you. Thank you for teeing up collaborations. For those of you who have visited the Expo booth downstairs, we actually have one dedicated to the work that we did with Wansi's organization, Singapore IMDA, on multilingual and multicultural biases. So actually, my question for you is, as you've mentioned, your AC is a little bit different in that it actually builds on some work that's been happening for a while. And in a sense, it's not like its own bubble. It's incredibly integrated into both a regulatory body and a scientific body. So how have you seen your AC sort of fitting into the work that's happened already? And how do you see it contributing something net new?
I mean, like I said, I can spend hours talking about that, but maybe I'll just focus on where Samir has sort of teed up a little bit for me to talk about the work that we're doing internationally with the other ACs. I think it's important that we are able to contribute effectively and help provide some kind of leadership, I guess, in the work that we do. So Singapore and Japan leads the track 2 work. I mean, there's track 1, which is content. And then that track 2 was testing and evals. So Singapore and Japan leads the track 2 work, but we also have a lot of support from the UK on the work that we're doing. So what we've done so far leading up to San Francisco, as well as after San Francisco, is joint testing exercises with the network. Why is this important? It's important because it's about, number one, coming together on agreeing on metrology, agreeing on methodology, as well as agreeing on standards. I think that's important. 2 is also about building capacity and capability within the network. We can't all be model developers here. We don't have that kind of resources, that kind of talent to bring in the people. And we're all starting, and we're all very new. So we're all starting from maybe a certain lower base. So it's important that we put together these capabilities and be able to level up our evals and our testing abilities, right? So that's important. So what we've done so far is joint testing in terms of, number one, reproducibility. That's something that we did with UK and US. Number 2, on more recently on multilingual testing, as well as cybersecurity testing. And that was important. And it was also a way in which we then try to see how can each AC bring their capabilities and the capacity to this conversation? How do we help one another? So the UK, having done some work around Bench, for example, are able to then bring that to the table and say, let's have this, let's test this and have a conversation amongst the AC network. And for Singapore and Japan, for example, then it's very much about how then do we organize a multilingual test. And that also then ties into the work that we've already done with Humane Intelligence around cultural and linguistic bias, right? That was more of a red teaming exercise where we brought in something like 9 Asian countries, not all ACs. Actually, we brought in research institutions to participate with us to do red teaming, identify a taxonomy of cultural bias that each country is worried about, then develop a methodology to think about doing a red teaming challenge so that we can replicate this on an ongoing basis so that we can generate more data, identify more opportunities where government and industry can invest in plugging some gaps. So it's been a really interesting, 6 months so far, actually 3 months since November, right? It's been a really interesting 3 months. I'm actually amazed at how much we got done in 3 months. And that's really a testament to the kind of effort that I think HAC is bringing to the table, and how we think that it's important that we collaborate and really just up our game collectively.
It's actually a good lead into my next question. So, all of you have alluded to this international network, and, there are many global organizations that are tackling AI safety. So 2 questions, maybe just across the panel, and Clara, we can start with you. One is, what is the thing that is net different that you see the international network of AI safety institutes contributing? And second is, to Wan Si's point, how can this network serve as maybe a method of moving faster, right? So of having this collaboration, not just to communicate with each other, but to then almost divide and conquer the territory that needs to be covered.
So a couple of things here. I think we've touched on this a bit already, but obviously each AC is slightly different and we all have slightly different areas of specialism that we bring to bear. I think what we have worked out through, particularly the kind of collaboration, the concrete collaboration that has already taken place, for example, on testing, is how valuable it's been for us to kind of bring our different kind of specialisms into play. And through doing that, I think, as Wan Si was saying, that we make sure that we have a kind of relatively limited pool of technical expertise in the world globally on this right now, right? So the better that we can coordinate, the better that we're able to kind of divide and conquer, as you say. We in the UK have set out our kind of priorities. We're particularly interested in kind of critical risk, and particularly in the areas where we think government has real expertise to bring to bear. But there are others across the network who are interested in kind of different areas of safety. Safety, as the panel earlier was saying, is a very broad term. And so in bringing those different areas of those different pools of expertise together, we can make use of them most efficiently. I think the other thing to flag is that what we've learned through this joint testing exercise that will be coming out soon, TBC. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Is kind of the benefits, like the tangible, concrete benefits that collaboration can have in terms of being more efficient. So the Bench testing that we ran collectively with the network, we utilized Inspect, which is the UK's kind of framework, which has already loaded on it framework for evaluations, which has already, it's open source. We think that's really important. We have open source and evaluations kind of preloaded onto it. And the rationale there is, in doing that, we are able to kind of speed up people's work because we have a kind of a shared framework for approaching evaluation. We have a shared approach, and that means that we're able to, to test and evaluate more efficiently. So yeah, those would be my reflections.
Samir, any thoughts?
I mean, it's tried at this point to say that the space moves quickly, the labs have a ton of money. If we're not coordinating as ACs, we're probably not succeeding. It's about as baseline as you can get on it, right? The opportunities to coordinate are there. I think the relationships are building. I think we're trying to do a good job of stitching it together. The relative specialties will kind of emerge over time, and we'll continue to deepen those, and that'll, I think, be the key feature for the next little while. And as the previous panel noted, I'll give a shout out to boring as well. I think some boring kind of, plumbing, connecting the dots, making things work is probably the most important thing right now. The international governance space around AI is extraordinarily cluttered. It's felt like, for the last year or so, kind of like an episode of Oprah from like a decade ago, where like, you get a code, you get a code, you get a standard. I mean, everyone's all over it, right? We're having meetings about AI when AI is far too general a subject matter to have a meeting about for the most part. And so getting deep, getting specialized, getting focused about what we're talking about. Again, previous panel was fantastic, talking about what's the deployment case? Where's the use case happening? What does safety mean in that context? What does responsibility mean in that context? Getting to those types of questions and being deeper about this is going to be really, really important in the near term. And I hope we can do that soon.
I'll just add something. I think we've already spoken about how we are working together. I'm on like many different international platforms. I participate in the OECD. I was just speaking in the UN panel recently and so on. I think, yes, agree that internationally there are actually many platforms, and actually all of them have different roles to play. And I think we need to recognize that. And my own personal reflection in terms of what we've done as the network, I thought was really interesting. In one, it was very practical, very hands-on. It was an opportunity to build trust in a very specific way amongst the network. I mean, how do you use Inspect? How do you use, for our case, it was Moonshot, right? There was another platform that we brought to bear. And can you do this translation in 3 days? I mean, I really want to thank all the ACs for contributing to our like last minute kind of, let's translate the benchmark in 3 days. Let's annotate the results in a week, right? And they have to look through like 1,400 responses from the models, and then just going through them one by one and giving their point of view about whether it makes sense or not. So, I mean, I appreciated the level of trust that all the ACs have brought to the table and allowed us to have this collaboration in a very meaningful way. Baby steps. I always say these are baby steps. We haven't quite, it's new, this network, and it's important that we start with baby steps to get ourselves comfortable with one another. So it allows us to do bigger and better and more important things together as we move forward. So that's one. I think the second thing, it's how then do we as a network connect with the other platforms that are coming out, right? How do we connect with what's happening in the UN? How do we connect with what's happening in the standards organizations like ISO, for example? And as a small network of 10 ACs, 10 countries, we've been able to be very nimble about how we do things. And I think that nimbleness allows us to then bring some real content, if we want, to these sort of bigger platforms that allows us to contribute in a much more meaningful way. So I think those are my reflections. And I think moving forward, that's something that we really want to do more effectively, plugging into the other platforms that are out there. Thanks.
Great. And so the last question, lightning question, I'm going to build on Samir's point about being boring. What's the most boring yet impactful thing that you would say needs to be a focus that maybe is not a focus right now? So I'll go. All right, I'll give you a minute to think. And while they're thinking, think of your questions, because Theo will be going around to the microphone. All right, thinking time over. 1C.
Boring but impactful. I like my job. I don't think it's boring at all, right? It's nice to be here in Paris and have these conversations.
It could be worse.
It could be a lot worse. Yeah, I think we're gonna have some people always ask. So what happens to the network next, right? It's just gonna be these 10 countries. What are we gonna focus on? I think these are conversations that we need to have. We will probably be having these discussions very soon. It's super boring. It's not actually technical testing, but I think we do need to get some of these governance discussions sorted to see how we can be more inclusive. Where do we want to focus our priorities, given that we all have limited resources and limited bandwidths? I mean, it's not just the international stuff that we have to do together. We also have our own domestic priorities that we have to focus on as well. So I think that's boring, but necessary. Yeah.
Amazing. Samir.
So I'd say boring for me means getting the balance right between the big events like the one that we're all gathered here this week to participate in, which are wonderful and important milestone events that bring the right people together and brilliant conversations. If the AC network becomes too driven on this cycle of kind of political engagements and announcements and declarations, that's not healthy for the network. It needs to be more technically driven, more technically focused, and driving on milestones that are actually focused on delivery of real capabilities and improvements and strengthening around metrology and all the rest of it, not so much on the other timelines. So I'd say that's pretty critical. I think once he's absolutely right, getting the internal governance right with everything that's going on, in the States these days. Really important for us to watch how that's going to unroll and what that means for the rest of the network and how we work together. So getting resilient plumbing together now is going to be really, really critical.
And Clara, to close us out.
I think kind of building on Samir's point, I think the it's not that boring. I agree also with 1C because I like it, but but the boring thing is getting people together in a room and discussing some of this stuff. And I think we've really felt the benefit in doing that in November in San Francisco, here at the summit, and around in the kind of surrounding days. I thought, for example, Ramon, you kindly sat on our panel in the Science Days that we led with the OECD about thresholds. Those kinds of conversations, even if they're really early stages, are really important as we start to think a bit about kind of not just the capabilities, the opportunities and the risks of this technology, but also what we do about it. And sometimes just getting people together in a room to have that conversation is the right thing to do.
Great, wonderful. And then any questions from the audience? We'll open it up to Q&A. I think we only have time for about 2, maybe 3. We have one question up here. Do you have a question as well? Perfect. So we have 2 here and then 1 over there.
Hello, thank you. I think I wanted to just build
sorry,
on.
can you also introduce yourself and where you're from? That kind of thing.
Okay, I'm Joanna from the Equiano Institute, based in London. So I just wanted to build on something that I think all of you said. 2 points was on one hand is inclusivity and global majority countries' engagement in the ACES network, but on the other hand, the power of effectiveness. That there are 10 actors, and I think in this convening in San Francisco, that was very powerful. So I just wanted to ask, what do you think could be the model of engagement and inclusivity of global majority within that network to keep that effectiveness, to keep the focus, and yet open up the discussions and open up the partnerships and collaborations that could come out of it?
Okay. Excellent question, by the way. I agree that having a small network allows us to be a lot more nimble and more effective, and leverage on each other's technical competencies. How do we reach out to the other parts of the world? So I mentioned briefly about the other platforms that we should try and connect to, the UN, for example, or the standards organizations. We also come from our own regions. So in Singapore, we are part of Southeast Asia. So we are also part of ASEAN, which is Association of Southeast Asian Nations. That's also an opportunity where we could use the kind of experience that we have in the AC network and then share that with our region, right? People that we are also engaging with on many other matters around AI safety on a regular basis. We also convene a network. Oh, I don't mean to use network group. Okay, called the Forum of Small States. So small countries, 10 million people or less, and that's also another platform which we could try and also share and link up and provide some of these experience that we have from the ACs. I think there are many things that we can do. It's just finding ways in which we can engage better. But yes, excellent question. Thanks.
Yeah, I would agree with 1C as well. For us, I think it's about connecting the dots between the AC network and other 4 that are working in this space without trying to be determinative of which of those are going to kind of evolve and take on which shape. We've got the Global Partnership on AI meeting later this afternoon. That's another key forum where countries are getting together and working on AI issues and trying to level set and balance out kind of approaches. So connecting from the AC, which again, we try to focus on it as a knowledge development, knowledge dissemination organization. And the way that we're doing it is very inclusive in the way that it's grassroots based. So it's about balancing out how are you developing the science and the research and the projects and the evals that are being done, and then how are you making sure that you're sharing those as broadly as possible and connecting it to standards, to policy organizations, to regulatory development.
Totally. Very, very quickly to build on that, just to say, definitely agree. Ollie, our director, says is kind of fond of saying content. He doesn't mean synthetic content. He means kind of pushing out what we do into the world. And I think that's something that the network has already done really well. As I say, we'll be publishing some, the research agenda for synthetic content, for example, the blog about the work that we've done on track 2 and joint testing. We in AC, in the UK AC, are really keen on publishing our work. We've published this week, for example, some best practice around evaluating misuse safeguards. So that's something that I think is a really important way of striking that balance and making sure that we're pushing out, as you say, Samir, the work that we're doing.
Did you want to talk about track 3? Because we haven't told them about track 3 yet.
Yes, I mean, I think that's so. Track 3 is risk assessment. Again, that's something where hopefully we're going to be publishing something in due course. It's about bringing together the network to think about exactly as we've just been discussing how we approach the assessment of risk. So yeah, that should
and
be
hopefully a
amazing.
compendium of tools, I think, in that as well. So
Yeah.
and taking knowledge, bringing it together, and spreading it so it's available.
And to our second question, we have.
Very happy to. Let's see if my voice will work. Hi, I'm Rachel Fagan, formerly of Integrity Institute and recently with the Algorithmic Justice League in the States. I think hearing you all speak, at the end of the day, AI is an industry like many industries. You're dealing with technical issues, but everything also has socio-technical implications, labor implications. And I wonder, for any or all of you, are there examples of that you're drawing from, or that you are inspired by, or modeling on from other industrial safety consortia, other industrial safety and responsibility initiatives over the course of the last 150 years, not just in internet and technology, but broader?
I think great question that links back to the conversations earlier about metrology, getting the measurements right, understanding it. A lot of that, and I think the previous panel touched on as well, looking at analogs to understand how to build those systems the right way. And certainly, I think the safety report that Clara highlighted earlier is an important touchstone for, I think, most of the AC network. It doesn't mean that it's ever going to be the final word. There's obviously going to be ongoing conversations about it, but it is a very helpful framing baseline, I think.
Super quickly, I think 2 reflections on that point. One is almost to kind of flip your question a bit. I guess the unusual thing about AI as a technology is, unlike previous technologies, it's not a disruptive technology that is born out of government research. Like it's the private sector that is driving forward and at the kind of often at the frontier of that technology and understands it the most. So that's why we've really prioritized in the UK building technical capability into government, because we think that's really important as we start to think about testing and understanding this as we start to build towards it. And then my second reflection, sorry, was going to be about just a quick plug for some of the thinking that we've been doing, which is around safety cases, which is looking to examples of the industries about how you build a case for technology being safe. We've been talking a bit about this week. So yeah, would point you to our website to look about that.
I think maybe just to add on to both the responses is that we work very closely with other sectors, other regulators in other sectors, where they don't just worry about AI, they worry about many other things in financial services and healthcare and so on. And so we draw on that experience as well when we think about safety for AI, because it's not an abstract thing, right? Exactly to your point, it has to be something that's grounded in what's real, how people are using this technology in these fields. Yeah. I think that was a question from that gentleman here.
Yeah, I think that will unfortunately, many hands are raised, but you'll be our last question. Hopefully, our 3 panelists would be kind enough to maybe take a few after we break, but please.
Thank you,
last
Roman.
question.
My name is Tomer. I'm from Active Fence. We are a for-profit user-generated content and AI trust and safety vendor, working with a lot of the large LLMs, including Serafina and Cohere, providing both red team data sets, trainings, evaluations. And you've heard that a lot today. There's a lot of redundancy that in the private sector is called competition. It's welcome. It drives the space forward. How do you guys think in AI safety institutes? I heard earlier, I think it was also Serafina that mentioned, we're building a lot of technical capabilities inside these companies, and then we see a lot of technical capabilities. I think, Claire, you mentioned like 60 technical folks in the AI Safety Institute. How do you guys think of that, avoiding redundancy? And I heard you mention kind of coordination around using each other's strengths. So how do you think about that in the sector that's moving so fast?
So very briefly on that, I think I don't know. I would maybe slightly disagree with the idea of there being redundancy. I think that at least the conversations that we've had both with our technical researchers, but also with industry, is that it has the common theme here, as you say, Samir. It's kind of goes without saying that this is moving incredibly quickly. If anything, I think the science of evaluations is moving so fast that it's very hard to keep up, and we find ourselves to be stretched, even with quite significant capacity within government to do all the testing that we want to do, the pace of development is such that the safety report had to have an addendum added to it, because in between the time that the report finished writing was finished in December and it being published in January, you had the release of O3 and you had the release of DeepSeek's R1. So, I mean, it's moving so quickly that I think actually, I don't think there's loads of redundancy. I think there's a lot of work to be done to kind of to push the frontier of kind of capability testing at the same time to match the kind of capabilities as they're being developed. But others may have reflections.
Yeah, I mean, we need capabilities to test for things that we care about, which may not overlap with what the labs care about, right? So that's one. So that's one way to think about that. And two, I think we also need capabilities in-house in the government, in the public service, so that we are able to validate and provide our own points of view about that. And if we don't do anything and just rely completely on the private sector, I'm not sure if we'll be able to eventually be regulate or be able to understand what's actually happening, right? So even if it's starting from very low base, even if it's sort of repeating what some of the model developers have been doing, I think it's necessary to start somewhere. And gradually we'll start to focus on things that we care about. And I think having a conversation, and we don't keep them at arm's length, right? I mean, we work very closely with the AI labs and say, look, where can we collaborate? How can we find an opportunity to tap on your expertise to build up our own capacities? How can we do things that complement one another versus duplicate one another? I think these are things that we do quite a lot of. And I don't, maybe before I end, I just want to just give a shout out to my colleagues from Korea. The Korean AC is in the house.
Thank you. Great response.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining this panel. And if you have any further questions, we have like a very urgent. Is this a very urgent question?
I'd love to ask it.
And it's up to our panelists. One more question.
Yeah,
One more question.
Great. Okay, I'll be very quick. So two brief questions. One is,
Oh, boo.
it's great to have all the ACs share information with one another. How do you ensure that information is being in ways that are actually beneficial as a whole, rather than in ways that could lead to specific capabilities that we may not want? That's number one. Number two, how do you think about some sort of gold standard global responsible scaling policies that everyone across different ACs should adopt? Thank you.
Not there yet on a global responsible scaling policy. I think that's kind of the whole point of doubling down and having all of us go into this space, is because there's obviously so much work to be done to figure out what the gold standard would look like. I think we're quite a ways away from a gold standard when the baseline itself is moving all the time.
I will wrap it at that because I know people are antsy. So thank you so much for joining for this panel. Again, if you have any further questions, you can come up here. Again, refreshments downstairs on the first floor, expo booths. Feel free to mingle. Our next panel actually starts in about 20 minutes. We're also now streaming on the first floor, so you don't actually be up here. We appreciate for the who've been standing. We did not expect to be standing room only. So thank you so much for your time, and please give it up for our panel.